Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to WorkSafe's webinar, The Importance of Leadership in Workplace Mental Health During COVID and Beyond. My name's Claire Neverovich, and I'm the Director of Prevention Strategy at WorkSafe Victoria, and I'll be your host for this webinar today. While our program of sessions is virtual this year, we have the same aim for Health and Safety Month that we always do, which is to keep you up to date. This year, our focus is on navigating COVID-19. Our session today involves a conversation between myself and one very special speaker, the final in our program for this year, Professor Tony Walker, ASM, the CEO of Ambulance Victoria. Before and during the pandemic, Tony has led Ambulance Victoria to new heights of mental health awareness and care for both his staff and their families. We've structured this session as a conversation between myself and Tony that outlines Ambulance Victoria's response to workplace mental health and wellbeing. There will be time for questions at the end. Do remember that if there's anything you need to speak to WorkSafe about, you can get in touch with us via our advisory line or our emergency line. You can see those details on the screen. And a few housekeeping matters before we get started. If you would like to join in the conversation on social media, you can do that by using the hashtag HSmonth. And remember that any information that we refer to, we will include a link on our website after the event has concluded. So, welcome, Tony. It's our great pleasure to have you here for the closing session for 2020 Health and Safety Month. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Claire. Pleased to be here.
Thanks. And I'd like to start with a question about your unique workforce. First responders suffer more than their fair share of mental health issues. Would you be able to give us a bit of a snapshot of the statistics?
Certainly, Claire, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there is this sense out there that emergency workers by their nature are superhuman, but we're no different than everyone else in the community, and it impacts the work we do and the things we see. Our workplace factors impact on us as much as they do anyone else in the community. It's really interesting. We know today that we've got 1 in 3 police and emergency service employees experience high or very high psychological distress compared to 1 in 8 members of the general community. We know that nearly 1 in 3, 2.5, 1 in 3 of our employees across the sector and 1 in 3 volunteers report being diagnosed with mental health conditions during their lives. And in the Australian population, that's 1 in 5. And importantly, 50% of our employees have been exposed to traumatic incidents as part of their work, and that's deeply affected them. So it's a significant issue and one that is impacting not just ambulance, but the broader emergency services sector. And in my own profession, in my own sector, we know that paramedics are 4 times as more likely to commit suicide than the general community. So it's a significant issue and one that we have to take very seriously. One of the key things are that we face unique risk factors related to our work. So often the case is the view that it's related to the cases we see. But our first responders also work long hours. They have shift work. They often have poor physical health. They do have trouble sleeping. Eating, we eat the wrong foods on the nature of the work we do. Bullying is still an issue in our emergency service organisations. The command and control culture and the issues of switching off from work can be very difficult. And the stigma, a big issue, a stigma of putting your hand up and saying, actually, I am struggling and need support. And one of our challenges at Ambulance Victoria is we'd accepted for a long period of time that was just part of the job. Being physically and mentally injured was just a natural risk of the job, and it's certainly not. And at AV, we've done a lot of work over the last few years to support our workforce to improve the mental health, and particularly so during the pandemic, a critical time for all of us, obviously, in the community.
Thanks for that, Tony. It's really interesting to hear you describe some of what your people experience and some of the challenges that they have. Can I now ask for a personal reflection from you? You're the boss of these people who are very vulnerable to mental health injury and unwellness. As a leader, how do you keep yourself mentally fit, and what's that been like during COVID?
Well, it's a really great question, Claire. And for me, I'm experiencing the same issues everyone else in the community is at the moment. Particularly being in Melbourne, lockdown at the moment. I've got a young 4 or 5-year-old at home. I've got the issues of having not seeing my adult kids and grandkids for some time. So for me, I've been really focused on mental health during this time, focused on using the mental health continuum, which we'll talk a little bit about today, which is a great tool to help me understand how I'm tracking, what symptoms I'm feeling, and signs I might be feeling at the time around my mental health. I regularly see a psychologist. I've continued that during COVID to make sure that I can be the best I can be, and trying to maintain that work-life balance. I've been trying to get out and exercise. It's not been easy, but trying to get out and exercise to recognise myself when I'm not sleeping well, to try and switch off, doing those things that I know, those sort of hygiene factors that I know are critical to me to be the best I can be every day, but also acknowledging right now that maybe I'm not going to be as good as I could be because of all the other factors going on in my lives, and being a bit kind to myself as well.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting to hear some of what different leaders do in these circumstances. Before COVID hit, if we can think back to that time, Ambulance Victoria had just developed the Mental Health and Wellbeing Action Plan last year. I'm interested to hear how that's helped, I guess, guide the systems and support that you've been able to provide to your people during what's an absolute, black swan situation.
No, thank you. I think the action plan in some ways has galvanised us. It's been our response at a strategic level in the organisation to say, well, this is how we're going to look after the mental health and wellbeing of our workforce, calling out the issues that we have and putting in place some very clear strategic steps in doing that. So I think we were well placed prior to the pandemic in a lot of our programs that we've been building up over the last few years. A lot of those are very much around getting people the right support when they need it. So, for example, the plan outlines the work we're doing in our peer support program, a fantastic program where our paramedics, volunteers and corporate staff can talk to other colleagues about issues they might be experiencing. Our psychological support programs, which have been really critical for people to be seeking help and support during this difficult time, not just from a work perspective, but from a family perspective as well. Because one of the big things for us is that you can't disconnect family and work life, particularly in emergency services. So we recognise that those two things are interlinked, and people are getting support in that space as well. A lot of early intervention, so we're communicating, and you can't overly communicate with your staff at a time like this. So we're communicating around the challenges. We're listening to our staff and engaging with them so we hear their issues and try and resolve those as best we can. And also very much focused on families right now, because as I mentioned, you can't disconnect families from your work life, particularly in emergency services. And so we've done a lot of work in how we support families and connect with families during this time. And recognising the important linkage between both physical and mental health. So we've supported our staff who can't get to the gym right now with some online yoga and fitness classes so they can keep active during this difficult time, because it's a critical part of what they do. And it's interesting, the work we've done around the Mental Health Action Plan has certainly shifted us as an organisation. Today, we're seeing our claims per 100 FTE for mental health injury actually increase. And I'm often challenged by people, well, why would you be happy to talk about that? Well, because it's actually meaning the stigma is starting to break down. That we've got people in the workplace now who are happy to talk about their mental health. But importantly, no different than a back injury or a leg injury or a shoulder injury, seeking that professional help, getting well and coming back to work. So a really important reflection for us about how we're helping break down some of the stigma through our action plan. And so it's really that sense now around more support, more interventions, and constantly learning, looking at the data to help us understand what our workforce are telling us and what we can do to keep making it better. One of the things I keep saying to our people is you don't just fix mental health issues in the workplace, it's an ongoing issue. We need to keep monitoring and improving every day.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting, and I think that point about seeing that increase in claims as a great lead indicator around people seeking the support and help that they need is a really good perspective. You mentioned a little bit earlier on a little bit of a teaser for us about the mental health continuum, and I just really like you to talk a little bit more about that. It's it's obviously a tool around describing how we're feeling and coping. If you just tell us a little bit more about it and how you've been encouraging staff to make use of that.
Yes, certainly. So I often say to people, if you leave nothing else out of today's talk, have a look at this continuum, because what it's helped us do is it's provided a literacy amongst our workforce to enable people to talk about their mental health without talking about the issues of depression, anxiety, diagnosis. You're actually able to see in yourself how you're tracking on a day-to-day basis. And the reality about mental health, each and every single one of us, is that it's a long continuum. The continuum can be in the sort of the green, where we're seeing this sense of well-being and things doing well, to alternatively where we're starting to get into a bit more distress, where things are not going as well. And so you move through this continuum. And the great thing about it, and I encourage people to have a look at it, is it provides you with an ability to go, if I'm in the green or the amber, how am I tracking? Well, I might actually realise that actually I'm not sleeping as well as I was. I'm a little bit less interested in the things going on around me. I'm drinking a bit more than I should be. I'm not feeling the same sense of enjoyment in life. Those are things early on that you can do self-management things to address, to watch what you're eating, get more exercise, try and get better sleep, turn off the devices, those things. But importantly, as the continuum goes, and if you're not seeing those things work, then you can start recognising the need to get professional help. So it's a great tool to basically enable you to have that conversation, look at yourself and how you're tracking, but also have a conversation with your colleagues, because often one of the things around suicide risk and those things has been people saying, I just didn't know what was normal in that individual. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know how to have the conversation. So this allows you to have a tool to reflect on your own well-being, but also importantly to have that conversation with your colleagues about how they're going, without trying to overlay the issue of diagnosis, but about how you're feeling every day with the things going on in our life. It's been a great tool, a great education tool, and really help break down the stigma through increased literacy in our workplace.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm sure that'll be something that many people will be taking a look at out of this session. You spoke a little bit earlier on, and just to that point about, when things aren't going so well, about that misconception that, staff, particularly in, emergency services work, are expected to really stay tough and carry on despite all of the things that might be going on. What is it that you're doing to really dispel that myth that being mentally and physically injured at work is just part of the job?
Well, I've got to say, a lot of it is around stigma and this issue of the consequences of me putting my hand up, that I won't be considered to be, the best person, the best paramedic, the best member of my workforce as I was before. And we've done a lot of work around stigma. I think stigma is the key in many cases around mental health, and being able to break that down by talking about it. I'm wanting a workplace where people feel just as comfortable sitting around the mess room table talking about their mental health injury as they would around their physical injury, their back injury, for example. And what we've done with this in our organisation is, through education, actually allow people to tell their stories. It's been incredibly powerful when people realise that the experienced clinicians, some of the intensive care paramedics, volunteers and corporate staff are up there talking about their mental health. Then it made the world of difference to them. Then all of a sudden it makes it permissive for others to do the same. I regularly talk about mental health. I talk about seeing a psychologist. It's done no harm to my career whatsoever. I started seeing a psychologist about a decade ago, because it created that opportunity for me to, after my marriage broke down actually, and started having that conversation. And it was the best thing I ever did. I just wish I hadn't waited 20 years to have that first conversation with a psychologist. And it's also that sense of preventative health. How do you focus on prevention rather than waiting for the crisis to occur, by good preventative mental health, again, by seeing a psychologist early on. So, it's working for us. We recognise that we're heading in the right direction. And again, mentioned the continuum before, and this focus on, that broader issue of breaking down stigma has made a real difference. But, it is a bit of a journey. We've still got a lot more work to do. But we're seeing an increased number of staff accessing our services, particularly during the pandemic. And that's a good thing, because they're doing it in the preventative sense rather than waiting for the crisis to occur. One thing for me, Claire, I often say is that, I wouldn't want to be going to visit an emergency department the first time I got chest pain to have my heart attack recognised. It's exactly the same around your mental health. Don't wait for the crisis to occur. Get that early check-up from the neck up, as one of my colleagues calls it, to make sure you're tracking okay.
Yeah, terrific. And I think, that importance of leaders speaking openly about that kind of thing is really, one of the key things that can happen with that stigma reduction to really help. You did also mention a little earlier on some of the work that you've been doing to support families and recognising the important role they play around your people. Can you share some of the benefits that you're seeing from that when really that support that you're providing is beyond just the individuals who work for you?
As I mentioned earlier, I know for me, it's really clear that there is an absolute nexus between our work life and our family lives, particularly in emergency services. And families are often the first people to see the issues going on. They're the first people to recognise behaviour changes in the people they love. They're the people that will actually be often suffering in silence with the issues that they're experiencing in their home life as a result of mental health and wellbeing issues with their loved ones. So for us, we've worked really hard in this space to focus on engaging families better so that families are actually, able to recognise where our services are and access those changes, but also notice those changes in their loved ones. So it's been a bit of a journey for us. We're getting there. We've set up a family website where families can confidentially go to seek their own help and support from our psychologists and others in our organisation. We've got family members sitting on our psychological health and wellbeing group, which provides strategic advice to me and other senior staff around mental health issues in our workplace to talk to it from a family perspective. And we've opened up our services to family members. So, for example, I've got a workforce now that is much younger than it was a number of years ago, and a lot of them still living at home. So we've opened it up for not just their wives, partners and children to be able to access our mental health services, but also their parents now, because the reality is they may be experiencing those issues in being living at home with their loved ones as well. So it's been it's really been an important part of engaging, recognising that there is this direct linkage. If people are doing well at home, in fact, family issues are often the most common reason why people will access our psychological services, and I think it's a fantastic thing. So we can make the home place well and going well, then it makes the workplace issues easier to deal with rather than put that burden on top.
Great, that all sounds fantastic, and I understand you do some great things such as promoting that family program at your graduation events and so on, which is a really great way to make sure people know about it.
Yeah, we do, Sarah. I think for us, it's also been really important for us that it's created this opportunity to also allow family members to feel that they can get the right support they need. So no, it's been a great thing to be part of, and I think it's one of the best things we've done over the last couple of years.
Terrific. Just picking up a bit of a theme of what you've spoken about a few times this afternoon, is, I guess, around connection and communication. I'm just wondering if you could share with us some of your thoughts about, leading through periods of uncertainty like what we're experiencing now. What are your top line tips for other leaders around connection and communication?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think the first thing is recognising that everyone has been doing it tough, and whilst we all might put on a face to say no, it's okay, we're coping okay. It has been a really tough time for every single member of the Victorian community, and we're no different. So from a leadership point of view, I think it's important to recognise that and acknowledge that, because people often want to hear leaders say, it's okay, we understand it's tough right now. I think the other one is listen to people right now. So make sure you're listening to what your staff are telling you. We've had great feedback from our staff about what's been working and what's not. Early on, particularly in the pandemic, around the health and safety issues around their personal protective equipment, making sure we're getting the communication right, simplifying it so that we're not overburdening them with lots of messages at a time when they've got so much else going on in their life. I think the other thing is being vulnerable. I think all leaders have to be upfront about how they're experiencing it. I'm the first to admit I've had a pretty tough few months. I mean, I've got a brand new granddaughter that I've only seen for 15 minutes in the last probably 4 or 5 months. So, for me, it's important we talk about that people can recognise that we're no different. We're experiencing the same issues, and that the right now, we're all in it together, and that we acknowledge that it's okay to get help. So if I can put my hand up and say I'm getting help and getting support I need, I'm hoping others will feel the same sense of it's okay to feel the way I feel, because often we think maybe we shouldn't be, and to get that support that we need, particularly now more than ever.
Terrific, thank you. We're going to shortly move on to some questions from our audience, and we've got lots of those coming through next to me here. But before we do that, I'm just interested in any lessons that you've learned about mental wellbeing and resilience during COVID times that you think will change Ambulance Victoria for the better into the future.
Great question, Claire. The big one for us is, we're a big bureaucracy like many public sector organisations, and we are slow to change sometimes. Well, I've got to say, I've never been proud of my workforce in the way they pivoted over the last 6 months, and particularly in the early days of the pandemic. So we've now working from home in new and different ways that's actually made that permissive now. Now, we don't want to be forced to have to work from home all the time, but I think it'd be great for us to be able to get better balance. And I don't see us returning to the workplace we had before. We're now working with our staff to build and design a new workplace into the future, because it will be different, it'll be better, I think, as a result of the learnings. So the IT uplift and the use of IT has been really critical. This role around business resilience, particularly right now, to make sure we've got the resilient programs in place to meet the constant changing needs of our community. And the really big one for me has been partnerships. So, we've formed new partnerships with Defence, with our emergency service organisations in different ways, other ambulance services, our health service colleagues, and we've been able to demonstrate through those partnerships that we're better together. And we use that term a bit at AV, but it's been really clear during the pandemic we can actually do a lot when we work collaboratively with others and recognise that we've got certain strengths that we can leverage off, but others have other strengths that we can partner with and do better. So I think the important thing is, whilst it's been a tough period for us and we're not over it yet, that we've actually learnt a lot over this time about how we can work better together. And we should never lose sight of some of the amazing things we've been able to achieve as an organisation and as a community over this time, and build those forward into the future, particularly the benefits of technology that we're seeing come through, that we can learn to engage and do things differently than we have in the past.
Terrific. It's that one of, never letting a good crisis go to waste.
Exactly.
So that I've taken you through a few of my questions there, but I'm pleased to say we've got lots of really great ones coming through on our chat. So we'll go through those and we'll try and get through as many as we can. One that has come through is a request to just share a little bit more information about Ambulance Victoria's peer support program.
Sure. So our peer program started probably nearly 30 years ago. And basically, we have 160 trained peers across the state who are paramedics, volunteers, and corporate staff who are basically will proactively follow up with our staff following difficult incidents, or just to engage with them to see how they're travelling, but also be available to be contacted if people want to talk to a peer confidentially. They're trained up, they are provided clinical support by a psychologist, and they're able to recognise the things that can help individuals at the time, but then refer them into other professional services if need be. And interesting, we've expanded this program over the last few years. We've actually now got our peer dog program, where we have 12 dogs across the state, which are owned by our peers and which go out with them to calls. And I've got to say that has been phenomenal in also helping break down some of the stigma and people opening up around their mental health to their pets or dogs in a way that they would not do normally. So it's been a great program and is really an integral pillar in our work to support our mental health and wellbeing of our staff.
Terrific. I'm just making a little note there about pet peer support. I might have to think about that one into the future. Here's an interesting one. We've had a bit of a theme come through some of the sessions at Health and Safety Month about some of the issues around occupational violence and aggression that certain professions experience. How much do you think that changes within society around sort of behaviour of individuals is having an impact on frontline emergency services workers?
It's having a huge impact, Claire. I've got to say, I think we've seen a paramedic injured every 50 hours here in Victoria as a result of occupational violence, and there is for whatever reason, there is an increase, and I think drug and alcohol is clearly a big driver of this, but we're seeing an increased propensity for uniformed emergency services workers across the state to be exposed to occupational violence. it's never okay, and it's a term's used a bit, but it's true, and it's important. One, we understand it. It is a critical occupational health risk in organisations, certainly is in ours. We need to understand it. We can never accept it. As much as I can't control the workplace directly, we can never accept it's okay. I mean, every single time a member of my workforce is injured through occupational violence, I'm notified. My board chair, Ken Lay, is notified. We do investigations into it to learn what we can do differently and better. And we're constantly trying new initiatives, working with our health partners around some of the behaviours concern work at the moment to address this issue. But it is a significant issue, and one that is career-ending for a number of my staff, and one that we can never take the foot off the pedal in trying to address.
Thank you. There's another one here as well, which asks about, often when you're doing things like, implementing programs to improve culture and mental health and wellbeing in workforces, it can be quite straightforward to get on board, perhaps that sort of management layer who are already converted to the importance of that. How do you go about engaging perhaps some of those people who may in fact potentially be part of the problem with culture within your organisation?
It's a really good question, and I just have to reflect back about 5 or 6 years ago when I came into the CEO role. Ambulance Victoria was one of the worst performing public sector agencies in some of the health and wellbeing issues. Now, I was part of that problem. I was an executive in that old organisation, but I just had normalised the issues as many had in the organisation at that time. So I think for us, it's one, recognising good people come to work every day to do good things. And so it's about, one, using good data to help you understand what the issues are, and education. So to educate people, to help people understand that what may have been acceptable as a way of doing things 10, 15 years ago is no longer acceptable today, and that we're constantly learning and adapting and rewarding. So it's about rewarding those leaders that do the right things, and promoting those leaders doing the right things across the organisation, calling those things out. I'll give you a good example. For me, I've had staff feedback to me where they may have attended a difficult incident. Now, years ago, they'd pretty much just be told, oh, well, off to the next job. Now it's a matter of my managers are empowered to just stand people down. You can go home if you don't, if you've just done a really difficult case, you should go home. You're not on sick leave, you're not on work leave, you should go home and recover and come back to work when you're ready. And so we see that, again, that sense of managers being empowered to do the right thing, as I often describe it, can make a world of difference. So I think, middle managers particularly have a tough gig. And so it's that sense of education and recognising that they're torn off between the frontline issues as well as the strategic issues the organisations are focusing on.
And perhaps following on from that, another great question about what sort of professional development and coaching are you giving to those people to really support them in making that cultural change that you're wanting to see?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think I don't think we're doing as much as we need to. I think it's that constant issue. It's been certainly challenged during COVID, although our organisational development team done a power of work, I've got to say, in trying to convert those programs online to use technology to help us do it. So we're focusing on one, when we, for example, rolled out our mental health programs, we rolled out training to our managers first. We're doing work with Veroc around the Upstander program, I should say. We're training our managers in that. So it is a sense of constantly looking to recognise that the first group of people you need to support are often your managers, so that they're well prepared to be able to roll out these programs and to deal with some of the more difficult issues in the workplace. So we've started a lot of work in that environment, but there's an awful lot still to go. I think as we, particularly as you come into some of the more difficult issues in workplaces, we can't underestimate that amount of work.
Great, thank you very much. Now, I've had a question about the mental health continuum, not surprisingly, about where we can find the tool. I suspect it may be something that we might link to, but do you have somewhere that you can point people to, Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. So Beyond Blue do have some information on their website. The other group, it's the continuum itself, is actually the Road to Mental Health Readiness coming out of Canada. But if you look up the mental health continuum online and Google it, you'll have a plethora of sites and linkages to it. But certainly Beyond Blue do have some information about it on their website as well.
Fantastic. And yeah, they've got such a lot of great information, particularly also relevant to workplaces, which is wonderful. I have another question here, I guess, going back to sort of both the peer support and the leadership theme that we've been talking about. What's your view on the best way to support peers in leadership roles? And I guess a comment following that sometimes the last thing we think about is self-care during these times.
Yeah. I think, part of this is about recognising all of us are challenged. And so, despite the face that we put on, particularly my peers, for example, and my executive colleagues, are equally doing it tough right now. And I think the important thing is, one, acknowledging that and being sensitive to it. So I think that's a really critical thing. You've got to be open to the fact that people have a broader lot of impacts in their lives right now. And as I said, be sensitive to that, and to give people some space as well. I'm pretty big right now about the fact that I don't expect everyone can be operating in their sort of the top of their game at the moment. I'm not. I know I'm not as as effective as I was a year ago. But that's okay, because it's important to recognise that. Put your hand up when you need help. So I think in that sort of broad connection of peers in that sort of setting, that'd be my response. I think the broader peer support program and others, it is very much around ensuring people have got the skills, and training is a critical part of that.
Terrific. I've got a question here about health and safety representatives. It's no surprise that WorkSafe really values the role that health and safety reps play in workplaces, and I'm sure you feel the same way about those that you have at Ambulance Victoria. Just wanting to hear about how you engage with your health and safety representatives, and I guess the role that they play in helping with mental health and wellbeing of your staff.
Yeah. So health and safety reps are absolutely critical, and I've got to say, right now during the COVID, they have been invaluable. During the pandemic, they've been invaluable. They have worked with us solidly, particularly through our health and safety committee, to deal with the issues of our personal protective equipment, for example, to deal with the issues of our response into the community at this difficult time, and are working with us now about how we respond into the heat. So how we're going to deal with heat coming into summer, again with personal protective equipment. But in the mental health and wellbeing space, they've been critical, being part of our mental health and wellbeing, psychological health and wellbeing group, consultative committee, where they're providing advice to us. They have been critical in helping us investigate issues in the workplace. Particularly mentioned before, one of the key drivers of mental health issues in our workplace are occupational violence. And so how do we engage our mental health health and safety reps in that? They've been really critical as part of investigations into that. So it's embedding them into everyday thinking. And as I said, our health and safety committee at the moment has been invaluable in helping us work through a number of really difficult issues as we've come to terms with the pandemic at both the physical and mental level, and also our response across the community.
Great, thank you. And I've got a really great question here about some of your non-operational staff. What's Ambulance Victoria doing to support the mental health of those non-operational staff who are working from home during COVID?
A really good question, and one that we're constantly challenged by. I think we've got nearly all my corporate workforce are working from home at the moment. And so a lot of it is about how do we maintain contact and keep in touch with individuals. We're doing that well in some places, probably not as well as I'd like to in others, but that's a critical issue. The other issue is, again, the way in which work is done. So recognising, particularly when people were working from home and also having to support their children while they're they're home from school. So with schooling going on, again, recognising that people's flexibility around the way in which they work, working more after hours, those type of things were really critical as well. So not trying to apply a paradigm of office-based work and just embed it or overlay it into the home office and expect it will be okay. It's that flexibility, and I think they're the special things that have come out of the pandemic and our response that have helped us probably recognise that we can keep those things going moving forward. I don't expect we'll return to a workplace we had before. I expect it'll be a hybrid of what we had before, where people are working from home as well as coming together in hubs to connect and network in a different way. So it has created some interesting opportunities for us. but equally recognising some people are doing it tough. And we know home isn't always the safest place for some people. So recognising that, we have arrangements for some of our people to come into work where they need to be, where we know home isn't the best place for them to be, and creating that sense of trust where people feel safe raising those issues with us so we can support them. And I have to put a big shout out to our Executive Director of People and Culture, Rebecca Hodges, and she's done a power of work in working to create those safe places so people can put their hand up and we can make sure they're being supported as well.
Great, thank you for that. Another really interesting question here, and it's about how you balance sharing that vulnerability about what you're really feeling and going through as a person and a leader with not bringing everybody down and sort of maintaining that level of positivity.
Well, Claire, I'm an optimist by nature, so that helps. I think, it's a really good question, because what people don't want to, have leaders necessarily do is dump every single thing going on in their lives at that time. My wife would argue I overshare too much sometimes over a lot of issues, but I do think there is an opportunity for us to, as leaders, to find that sweet spot. Because there is a sense sometimes we have to be completely, concrete and, not identifying any issues and, life's great. Well, people see through that because they know right now it's not. So I think it is about sharing a bit about yourself, sharing a little bit about some of the stories and things you're going through, but importantly, what you're doing about it. Because at the end of the day, people expect leaders to step up at the moment, and it's important that we do. And therefore, people need to hear from us what we're doing to ensure that we can continue to operate effectively. For me, as I mentioned before, it's it is trying to find that balance, that those work-life balances at the moment, and recognising that I have to work differently than maybe I worked before. But I think it is important. I think there is a risk we aren't vulnerable enough as leaders, and I think it's an important thing for us to talk about and to share that sometimes take some risks and share a little bit about yourself, because it's amazing how people can go, okay, they're experiencing what I'm experiencing, and they're getting help for it. It's okay, they're doing okay.
Yep, great, thank you. A question here about some of the strategies for recognising mental health issues in employees, and I know you've spoken about that great common language you've got with the continuum, but just whether you've got any examples of ways to identify if staff might be having concerns and ways to ask about that without sort of crossing that line.
Again, really good question. And for us, we do a psychosocial survey every 2 years, which has been really, really powerful. So we engaged Phoenix at the University of Melbourne to run this psychosocial survey. It's fully confidential. Around 50% of my workforce will engage in it. And it tells me, it baselines my organisation and my people in the sense of how they're tracking around their mental health against societal norms, against other emergency service organisations. It looks at issues around alcohol use. It looks at issues around tiredness and sleep and those things. And it allows us to use that. By doing that every 2 years, one, it gave me an initial baseline, and we're able to see whether the interventions we're putting in place are making a difference. So that's the first one. The People Matter survey gives me pretty raw feedback every couple of years, or every year I should say, about how people are feeling, and that's an important tool, and we shouldn't lose sight of that as an important way of recognise how people are travelling, and the broader people metric data that organisations have is there as well. So absenteeism, looking at issues around work, occupational violence I mentioned before, looking at all those sort of broad data pieces in organisations that may not be historically thought of as telling you about the well-being of your workforce can make a difference. So they're the things for me, but I think our psychosocial survey has been really critical to that.
Great, thank you. There's a question here that noting, I guess, that emergency services workers can tend to use things like alcohol and perhaps humour to deal with mental health concerns. What are your suggestions for sort of moving instead to perhaps, more healthy ways to be able to manage some of those stresses?
Yeah. So alcohol use is an issue for emergency service workers, and I think it's important, one, that we recognise, all of us, that if we're if we're relying on alcohol as a crutch more than maybe we did previously, that's the time to be recognising that, and ideally keeping an eye on it, winding it back, or seeking that professional help if you can't. And we're offering alcohol and other drug services confidentially to our staff that they can access if they need to. Importantly, so I think that's a critical one. We're doing a lot of work around this linkage between being physically fit and mentally fit, and so a lot of work around how do you engaging our staff in activities to maintain their physical fitness, because we know the more physically fit, better, healthier you are, the better you are at broader life. So they're a big focus for us. But I think the important thing is just calling out the issue that in recognising symptoms in yourself of increasing alcohol use, that you can do self-help strategies or seek professional help if required.
Great, thank you, Tony. And this might need to be our final question. We've had them coming through thick and fast, no surprise there. But what would you say are the top 3 most important factors in creating a workplace culture that supports mental health?
Top 3. One, it starts at the top. And so if mental health and isn't the top agenda on your board agendas or executive agendas, then it's telling everyone it's not important. One of the things for me that and it is a big issue in our organisation, that if leaders are chairing the committees, if leaders, CEOs, I chair our psychological health and wellbeing group. Now, if I delegate that to someone else in the organisation, I'm saying it's not as important an issue. So that's the important thing, is around leadership and having a clear strategy that sets out what you're going to do, that has measures in it, and which allows you to make improvements. I think the other one for us is creating a language of literacy, and I mentioned before the mental health continuum, which is really, really critical. And education and training is also really, really critical, so that that people are educated to be able to then start talking about mental health and understanding the issues and helping break down the stigma. So being vulnerable and being open about your mental health is critically important as well.
Thank you very much for your really open and frank answers to those questions. Have you got any final messages for our viewers today?
Final messages. Well, I think for me, mental health's important. I think it is something that we have to keep focusing on constantly. It is a critical issue for our workplaces. If you don't believe it makes good sense just because it's the right thing to do, it makes good business sense. And leadership is absolutely critical more than ever. So I think having a clear mental health strategy and a clear plan, it'll benefit your organisation. It's certainly benefited ours. We're not there yet. I've got a lot more work to do, but as I often say, we're better today than we were yesterday, and we'll be better tomorrow if we keep focusing and improving on the work we're doing and keeping the mental health and wellbeing of our workforce number one as our number one priority.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Tony, for all of the fascinating insight that you've shared with us today. And I'm sure all our viewers will have really appreciated everything that you've spoken about. WorkSafe is really also very committed to ensure that all Victorian workers are supported through these particularly tough times, and most especially our magnificent frontline responders. And soon we'll have on screen a list of key contacts and resources that we've talked about today. If you do have any requests for any further information, please do reach out and get in touch. Thank you very much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.